And thanks to Jason for that report. The sudden downfall of two of China's most senior military leaders has fueled speculation that Chinese regime leader Xi Jinping is entering a decisive and potentially destabilizing phase of internal power consolidation within the Chinese Communist regime. Joining us for analysis is Dr. Keith Naughton. He's co-founder and principal at Silent Majority Strategies. Keith, thanks for joining us. China's Ministry of National Defense announced that Zhang Yuxia and Liu Zhenli were under investigation for, quote, serious violations of discipline and law. What are your thoughts on these charges?
Well, we know that there's an enormous amount of corruption at all levels in the Chinese government and in the CCP. That's been the case for decades. But we also know that she is engaged in a multi-year effort to consolidate power. So how much of this is really cracking down on corruption? How much corruption is there behind this? And how much is this she just sort of wiping out any possible internal opposition or any other centers of power? It's probably a combination of both, but it's a very dangerous consolidation of power within the CCP, which, for all its faults under its previous leaders, has had a bit of a collaborative system since the downfall of Mao. But now we're in one where we've got an old man, isolated, consolidating power that's very dangerous.
Yeah, and as you say, it's almost like trying to decipher hieroglyphics, understanding what the announcement is and what's actually happening with no functioning free press. Now, as you mentioned, Chinese regime leader Xi Jinping, he rewrote China's term limits. He's the first since regime founder Mao Zedong to have a third term. Yet a few months ago, China insiders were saying that Xi had suffered a stroke and that with the struggling economy and the civil unrest, that he had lost his grip on the country and he was on his way out. Has he now enjoyed some sort of a resurgence?
Well, I think that might have been some propaganda on his part. That might have been some misdirection that he had sent out. Might have been a strategy to flesh out some of his opponents, making himself appear weak. Allows others maybe to come forward who are trying to oppose him, and then so that he can nab that faction. It's like you said, it's very inscrutable. It's sort of like back in the old days of the Cold War Kremlinology. It turns out that the West had very little understanding what was going on in the Kremlin and the Soviet Union, even less in Mao's China. We're back to that age where I think it's very difficult to figure out exactly what's going on. What we do know is there are only two people at senior level in charge of the Chinese military. It's Xi and one of his assistants, who's probably just a yes man right now. We don't know what kind of controls there are. We don't know what kind of checks and balances there are on the use of military force, on the use of force domestically, on the projection of power internationally. It's a very dangerous time because we really don't know what's going to happen and the decision she's going to be making.
And Keith, how has the Trump presidency affected the inner workings of the regime and Xi's decision making?
Well, I think it's shocked him at times because Trump is, he's got a very aggressive posture, but he's changes his mind from time to time. I mean, he reacts quickly to defense, or excuse me, he reacts very quickly to changes in the international situation. He's much more aggressive than past presidents. And I think one thing that the president's adopted has been try to keep his opponents off balance. And I think that can be a problem at times, but it can also be a significant advantage. I don't think the Chinese know exactly what he's going to do. I think his aggressive actions in Venezuela have shown that the Chinese and the CCP have to think very carefully about how aggressive they are, certainly in the Western Hemisphere, and the success of that American military operation, which, you know, our equipment barely got dented in the whole operation, has to concern him, considering the corruption in the PLA, considering that the PLA has not been involved in significant military activities in combat in decades. He has to wonder how they would perform in a fight against either the United States or against American armed allies.
Yeah, you bring up a very interesting point because that anti-aircraft technology was supposed to be both Chinese and Russian, and it performed miserably, as you point out. Overwhelming success in that operation. I want to pivot a bit, Keith. So the Chinese regime has been threatening to invade Taiwan despite never having ruled the democratic Chinese neighbor. And that ramped up significantly under Xi, this threat of invading Taiwan. This past weekend, American climber Alex Honnold, he free-soloed Taipei 101, and it was broadcast live on Netflix in 5 languages, including Mandarin, and subtitled in another 5 languages. Netflix doesn't release their viewership, but unless you were living under a rock, pretty much the entire world either watched this or they heard the news. And how does such a positive media moment for the often little heard from democratic Taiwan play with the regime, considering, narrative and script control is so important to their unconventional warfare tactics?
Well, I think they hate that. I mean, anything where people are doing something independent in Taiwan, where people are able to engage in sort of free activity and free association, or engage in creativity, all things that are stifled on the mainland, I think are a problem for the regime. So I think it's a victory for him. I wouldn't do it. I don't think I could look down for that. I couldn't help myself from looking down for that long, which I think is a downfall. You got to keep looking up the whole time you're climbing. So quite an accomplishment by him. But it leads to another point. I think that as a free society, it has certain strengths that can never be achieved by a society that's dominated from the top down, that's dominated by the CCP. So I think it's a helpful propaganda victory. And I do think that this turmoil in the military within the PLA, within the Chinese leadership, I think it's going to buy Taiwan some breathing time, but we still have to watch and be very careful because the ultranationalism hasn't stopped and it won't stop for some time.
Yeah, all the news coming out of Taiwan from this hemisphere is really just about this threat of invasion. So it was shocking to see such a cultural moment in the Taiwan flag flying and sort of this friendliness between the West and Taiwan in something that had nothing to do with the typical narrative. And just as we finish up, Keith, I just want to get your view as what you think might happen next as it relates to the regime's internal power struggles.
Well, I think she's going to continue to clear out people. Maybe he might go down to the lower levels if he feels that he's wiped out enough of the senior leadership. But, there's a problem for him. Paranoia doesn't stop once you've wiped out your rivals. You've got to replace them with other people. And I'm sure some of that paranoia will return when he elevates others. And I think they know that. I think he's going to be elevating a lot of yes men. I think they're going to be echoing his thoughts. And one of the unspoken dangers of where Xi has become over the last 5 years is how isolated he is. And is he really getting accurate information about the economic problems in China, about the problems within the PLA, how deep the corruption and problems in the military are? And that's very dangerous. When you have someone who doesn't understand the full scope of problems that you face, they can make miscalculations. And a miscalculation by China, especially in Taiwan, could be very dangerous for everybody.
You make a great point illustrating the dangers of having someone with so much power without a real sense of, if he's surrounded by yes men. Dr. Keith Naughton, thank you so much for sharing your insights.
Thank you.